All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Outsourced CFO webinar. We've got a really special lineup for you guys today. We've got some of our top chartered accountants from the OCFO team here to share all of the knowledge they've gained in the last 2 months of working with entrepreneurs and business owners under really some of the most tricky circumstances I think that most of us have ever seen in the business environment since COVID-19 started really affecting business around the world. We've seen about 4 million cases now, 300,000 deaths around the world, with South Africa also being hit fairly hard. We've got our first 12,000 cases here. Business has really been shaken up by all of this. Lockdowns, more than half the world's population is currently on lockdown. It really changes things quite a lot. So I think for business owners and for people that form part of leadership teams in companies, this is really a challenging time. And there's a lot of decisions that have to be made quicker than ever before, and a lot of new things that need to be considered in terms of, what will you do right now to firstly survive, and then also what will you do in the future to make sure that the company thrives as the world starts coming out of this deep crisis. And none of us know exactly how deep and how long we have to wait. We heard our president speak a little bit this week about what lies ahead for us. But I think there's a lot to be gained from a crisis like this. If we really soak up the knowledge and really try to learn what we can from it, I think there's a lot that can be gained. So our approach for today is very conversational. You guys will see we have a couple of CAs on the screen. Guys, say hi, please. We've got Johan and Calvin and Lazan and Uwais, who are all chartered accountants and all part of the OCFO advisory team in one way or another. And there's some of our CAs who've worked with the most entrepreneurs going through a really deep crises that they've helped them to navigate through. So they've got first-hand experience that not every business owner will have who only works with one company in one industry. So how we've approached today is, firstly, we want to give you guys some market feedback. Just kind of what these guys who are out in the field working with business owners, what is their kind of sense of how things are going out there at the moment. Then we're going to talk, because so many companies have had to scale down their operations in one way or another. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the best practices around scaling down, like what are the best approaches that we've seen entrepreneurs use out there and management teams implement. We're going to talk about pivoting, like how do you take what your company has done prior to COVID-19, and how do you just change direction on that to make sure that your offering is valid in the marketplace of the future. We're then going to look at relief funding and some tax matters, because there's a lot of complexity there, a lot of things to navigate, and so much information out there on that. So we just want to kind of unpack a few of the core issues, and then we're going to chat through a few things around leadership. Just how can we as leaders, as business owners, as managers, as CFOs, how can we make decisions that make sense in this time for our companies, for our people, and in the process of building a prosperous world and a prosperous country going forward. So I hope that everyone is ready for this. I hope you've had your lunch and you've got your post-lunch coffee ready, because we've got a jam-packed one for you today. There should be a chat at the bottom of your screen. If anyone has a question during the process, which I'm sure there might be, you can just raise your hand in the chat box. You can pop the question in. We're going to see how we come out for time. We don't want to keep you guys later than 2 o'clock. If we've got a bit of time at the end, we'll address all of these questions. If we don't get time for that, we'll make sure that we get back to you guys individually on those specific questions. So guys, that's enough from my side. We're here to learn from all of you. So the first question that I really want to ask is just, how would you guys rate the business conditions out there at the moment? Like, if we were to say that, the 10 is absolutely serene, perfect conditions to build a company in, and 1 is absolutely horrific, it's a disaster and nothing will ever work, how would you guys rate it right now? Lazan? Lazan, you're still on mute there. Sorry, Lazan, you're on mute. Uwais, you too. There you go.
Sorry.
Go for it.
I would say a 3. And I think mainly because most of the clients that I'm working with are finding the situation quite difficult at the moment. I think it's not ideal in any aspect. Yeah, so I would say 3.
Got a 3. Weiss, what do you have for us?
I'm probably lean towards a 4. It's probably close to where Lizanne is saying, but there's always an opportunity. I mean, if we said 1, there'd be no hope. I think there's still hope. So I'm saying there's a 4.
Okay. Calvin?
Yeah, I was going to go with a 4 as well. I've got a couple of clients that are able to operate decently during these times, so that brings me up from a 3 to a 4.
3 to a 4, Johan?
I might be leaning more towards a 2 or a 3, and it's just because the Reserve Bank said that the economy is contracting with 6%, and the 2008 crisis was actually at a 1.5% for comparison. So I'm maybe slightly more pessimistic.
Weiss, on the 4 side there, little ray of sunshine, you mentioned the word hope. Why did you say that?
Well, I suppose small businesses have the opportunity. They are nimble and they've got an opportunity to make money off your larger businesses that potentially have higher cost levels, and also a lot of the smaller companies that have come out of the previous financial crisis, like Airbnb. A couple of those companies will come from the previous crisis. So I'm expecting to see a couple coming out of this crisis as well.
Spot on. Johan, do you want to elaborate on your 2? Your potential 2? That's scary. Very scary.
Yeah, no, I think it all depends on how the rest of the lockdown is looking. Currently, I see a lot of clients, especially obviously in some of the more vulnerable industries, and we'll get to that, being hit the hardest. But the consensus at this stage, looking at the economy, like I said, the Reserve Bank is saying that the South African economy will shrink by about 6% this year. Other research centers say we can go up until 16%. And like I said, the 2008 recession crisis was only at 1.5% for South Africa. So I think for comparative reasons, we quite haven't seen something to this scale in magnitude as at yet.
No, for sure. For sure. I think 6% is probably on the conservative side, yeah. Johan mentioned industries now. Guys, what industries were hit the hardest as far as you've seen? Lizanne?
I've definitely seen in the media industry or events planning, tourism, hospitality, and construction. I think those are the ones that I've seen being really impacted quite hardly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's definitely a couple of specific industries. Lizanne said hit it on the head there, in terms of, you know, it's really hard to operate in those business environments and those sectors. But you know, there are also a couple of outliers here and there. You'll see a green shoot coming out. Who has an example of an industry that may have kind of stood up in this time quite well?
Yeah, I think I can definitely jump in on that one. A client of mine operates in the digital consulting and software development industry. I think they're in the perfect space at the moment to assist current businesses to pivot. So they've really taken on quite a bit of business at the moment. Online education being really in high demand at the moment. So I've seen a lot of excitement in that industry. I think e-commerce is obviously taking off as well. Yeah, those are the 3 that I've really been excited about.
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of industries that are quite well positioned to still take advantage of this. But I think across the board, you know, 9 out of 10, if not 19 out of 20 companies have probably seen some kind of revenue drop in the last while. Weiss, are you able to speak to that? Like, what kind of revenue drops have you guys seen among founder-led companies?
What I've noticed is it's very industry specific. So maybe your tech companies on average have been, they've lost anywhere, say, between 10 and 30%. And it sounds like a lot, but compared to some of the other industries where it's gone, we're talking massive reductions, like 50% to 80% drops in revenue, or tourism companies that have lost all their revenue. So depending on the industry, it has made a big difference to the impact on each business.
Yeah, so I think for our listeners today, like, you know, regardless of where you find yourself on that spectrum, there will always be someone who's better off than you, and there will also always be someone that's worse off than you at the moment. So just kind of figuring out what your positioning is and how best you can take some steps to navigate that if you need to cut down, to figure out new strategies. And we'll jump into some of that just now. I just first maybe want to hear, like, still like, you know, how are entrepreneurs doing at the moment? Like, how are the guys holding up? Johan, what's been your sense in the market?
Yeah, sure. I think for the most part, they're overwhelmed, right? There's a lot of information out there and communication out there, and sometimes a lot of it conflicting with each other as well, and, you know, trying to make sense of it. And then at the same time, desperately trying to stop the bleed of funds, costs, revenue going out of the door at the same time. And then you get this relief funding and options and tax reliefs and all these coming on this side, and, you know, lots of different options from all sides. And you're not always sure what's the best way to spend the energy on, and what should be utilized, what is a lost cause. And then you want to start, and then everything is fully subscribed to. So I think just to kind of navigate these waters, and in a sense almost being unable really to see where the waves are coming from, I think the entrepreneurs are finding it challenging.
Sure. Yeah, that's well put. No, thank you, lad. Yeah, I think it is probably some of the most difficult circumstances that most business owners would have ever faced in their career of building companies. And yeah, there's some action needs to be taken in accordance to that. So the next couple of questions will be kind of built around, you know, scaling down. Wais mentioned earlier that a lot of different companies have lost some percentage of their revenue, a small percentage, and some of them a massive percentage to almost everything. Let's just maybe kind of like think of like, what are the best approaches to going about cost cutting? Wais, would you be able to jump in on that? Like, how do you go about figuring out how to cut costs best if your revenue has dropped significantly? You're just on silent. Microphone still off, Wais. There we go.
Sorry, there we go. Sorry, do you mind just repeating the question for me?
So just kind of like, you know, cost cutting is inevitable when the revenue starts dropping. Like, I just want to think about like, what are the best approaches to going about cutting costs in a company right now?
So the cool heads are basically needed, and you can't cut. There's an option or risk that you might cut too deeply, and you want to avoid that. For example, we've seen some companies cutting their sales and marketing expenses completely, but you still, while you're trying to bring in sales, you can't cut it off completely. You might need to be a little bit more smarter about how you have those sales and marketing expenses, but you still need to have some level of sales and marketing expenses. And the other option is not cutting all your staff, because the cycle turns, and when the cycle does turn, you're going to need your strong employees. And if they're not there, if you've already retrenched them, then you won't be able to. Your business value will decrease because of it.
No, definitely. I think salaries is then also a big component for most companies in terms of, you know, looking at the income statement. Salaries will generally be a very big percentage of it all. Johan, we've seen, you know, a wide array of different salary cost cutting approaches out there. What have you seen implemented in the market that has worked well?
Yeah, I think it really depends on obviously the market where you operate. So I've seen, you know, especially your lower income workers that's working on a per time, you know, per hour based billing that can't come to work, you know, especially in the hospitality traveling industry, that's, you know, obviously their business is completely decimated almost in this time period. So a lot of bigger retrenchments actually happening in that area, whereas on your services sector, which the biggest cost element on the financial statements or on the income statement is generally the salaries component. So there's not a lot of levers that's available to them to pull. So it stays one of the, I think, quicker, more effective ways to help navigate or see how you can stop the bleed. But there's also a lot of funding opportunities or relief funding opportunities, especially for salary. So I think it's communication is key with all the stakeholders and with staff, managing the expectations, and then to see what can be leveraged in terms of relief funding.
Definitely. Very keen to get into that conversation under the next subsection. I think there's some golden nuggets in there. You know, so we've mentioned companies who've been really hit hard, like lost the bulk of their revenue, some guys all of their revenue. And we're not perfectly sure like how long that will be the case. Like, how long will it take before tourism starts getting back, as an example, or before events are opened up, etc. Bizon, is there ever a time to kind of call it quits, to say, look, we've tried everything we can, we cannot cut costs below zero. If we've got no income coming in and we've run out of runway, is there a right time to kind of, give up and call it quits and close the business?
I think, unfortunately, there probably is. I wouldn't like to call it giving up. I would like to look at it from a perspective of maybe a strategic review, a strategic detour as such. But I think if you see in the short to medium term that you are really just going to incur cost and very little income is coming in, and it doesn't really make sense to put your staff on short time, for a few months, then it's probably the right time to liquidate as such, and to liquidate your assets and make sure that you actually take what you can get, if I can put it that way. By means of an example, I had a client who is in the media and events industry. It's very clear that in the medium term, even for the next 6 months, they won't be getting a lot of revenue in. And they, unfortunately, after 8 years of trading, decided to make the decision to close their doors. And for them, they did it really from a perspective of take what they can get now and reassess and see what they're going to restart in a few months' time. Because the idea is definitely to create a version 2 of what they're doing now. But right now, for them, for the company, and for staff, they felt that was the best thing to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen a few entrepreneurs who've, when the company absolutely can't operate, they do start something else right now. They can operate and take advantage of this current scenario, just as a side project to help them generate some revenue and use their resources temporarily, with the idea that, they've leaned down the main business, and if it bounces back, it can scale up again. If it doesn't bounce back, it is at a point where costs are cut to a point where they could potentially then close that down. And if the new project then has generated significant enough traction, they can probably then start running with that business. So, kind of pivoting completely between industry and product offerings in totality. If that's the case, I guess, entrepreneurs are a resilient species altogether. So you kind of make plans and try to take opportunities that arise. In that process, if it's going hard, let's say we're not going to close, a company's not going to close their doors yet, but they are incurring losses. Guys, is there like an acceptable amount of losses to incur, an acceptable amount of debt to take on? I'll put this to the floor. What do you guys think?
I think it's a bit tricky. I suppose for me, it's important to have a cash flow forecast in place so that you can at least try and predict where, if you have an idea of when your next revenues can come in and how much money you need to get yourself to that point where your revenue start coming again. And the only way to do that is start planning your cash flows. I think it's a very valuable tool to have to decide what to do next.
Definitely. I almost don't know how, without a very, very detailed cash flow for the next 6 to 12 months, how a business owner can really make a decision right now in terms of when and how deep to cut, what decisions to make in terms of, staffing choices and things like that. So I think, one of the most important tools in your pocket right now is probably a proper cash flow forecast that you can scenario play, and that you can figure out how to make the best decisions that are possible. I'm looking for a story of an entrepreneur that's managed scaling down quite well. Johan, I think you mentioned having a story like that.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a client that actually the moment that the lockdown started, or even just slightly before that, he immediately contacted us and says he needs a strategic partner as well to guide him through this. So we put some strategy time aside, and we looked at exactly what is happening in the business. We critically evaluated every cost line. We see all the financing that he had from the different sources, how we could consolidate it into a better rate. Obviously applied for relief funding, as well as specific relief requests to, etc., like the landlords. We made a plan as well for the salaries, but luckily our efforts has helped us to not cut that as of yet, even though that option still exists. And also a plan to entice debtors to pay their funds quicker. So I think it was a quick solution, or a quick effort to quickly stop the bleed and get a plan in action as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I like what you've said there in terms of, just the decisive action is one of the key things in this time to just to not be kind of weighed down by the current circumstances, but to be able to, as a leadership team, quickly make those decisions that'll make all the difference in terms of, implementing those strategies that will help the business navigate the current circumstances. The next part we're going to talk about is pivoting, just kind of like taking what your offering was prior to COVID and just moving it a little bit left or a little bit right to suit the current conditions, whether that means going remote, whether that means digitizing your product. Guys, what are some of the best pivots you guys have seen out there? Calvin, do you have something for us?
Yes, absolutely. No, thanks. I think, speaking about the digital age, having technology in place and using that to pivot is your first step. One of our new clients on board, very exciting to work with them in the coming weeks. They're a traditional functional gym, that people attend and on the ground, and they've managed to recently launch an online platform where they sell in 10-week training courses basically to the public. And I think it's an incredible pivot, just from the traditional gym to an online platform via an app. They've actually got potential investors on the table from New York, so it's very exciting at the moment. And they've run this through an influencer marketing strategy. So it's been through influencer marketing, which you don't really see out there being very successful, but it's really worked for them. So that's been great to see. That's one of our newest clients. And then maybe a long-standing client in the agency activation space has also had to look to go digital. So they're trying to build a digital online marketing strategy for their clients.
Definitely. So I think it's, figuring out what have you got in your hand, what is the expertise that you have, what capacity does your team have, and how can you utilize technology and change and figure out something that'll work under the current circumstances. I love the example of the gym. It's such a concrete one because gyms are absolutely closed. There's no two ways about it. You cannot trade, and most of your members are probably not going to be paying if they can't actually access your facility, which is your product offering, right? But then figure out a way how to move that online, and then sometimes even these kinds of pivots then push a company to a point where the innovation that comes out would maybe never otherwise have existed in the ecosystem, and now they've got a product out in the market that they've got significant investors interested in, which could steer the company in a whole different direction to become a tech business and an online training company instead of just a physical gym where the scale of that is limited to some extent. So I love that. Lizanne, do you have an example for us of someone who's pivoted really well?
I have a client who's actually a charity. They usually provide literacy support to schools. And obviously during this time, the schools are closed, so they don't have any access to the schools. And they immediately ask themselves, well, what is the need now? So they started to move into food delivery in poverty-stricken areas. And they actually delivered 100 tons of maize last week. So that's amazing, just how quickly they changed and be able to do that. And all their staff that are usually going out to schools and assisting the various facilitators are now basically having their own little call centers from home, organizing deliveries, etc. So yeah, that's a thing that was quite inspiring to hear about.
Definitely, yeah, I love it. I think we work with the guys at Ideas Cartel, which are it's a members club with a physical entrepreneurs co-working space with a really nice restaurant and things like that. So obviously all of that's it's locked down and closed up. But the guys have re-engineered the kitchen to be able to do deliveries of fresh produce, and they've actually created a significant revenue line item from this, as well as online webinars, which is such a massive pivot from what their core business used to be. But entrepreneurs are finding kind of creative ways to still make it work, to use their resources and their staff and their knowledge and their networks to get something to market that still generates revenue, right? I think that's one of the big things. But with a lot of people doing that, a lot of people are trying now to push their product or their service online. Everyone's fighting for a very similar kind of market share in each one of the industries now. How important do you guys think it is to stand out? Like, how important is that value proposition that makes you stand out from the crowd? Calvin?
Yeah, I think more important than ever, during a crisis. As I think Winston Churchill even said, never waste a good crisis. It's a really great time to take a step back, look at the current value proposition that you have in place for your clients, and reassess that. Understand the value that they are receiving now, whether it's still relevant, and having to adjust, continuously and adapt continuously to prove to them that the value that they're receiving is up to standard or even better than what they've received in the past. So I think founders and management are really having to rethink value propositions, access to market strategies. They're really forced to adapt business models and service offerings to this new economic landscape and business environment we find ourselves in.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I think a crisp, clear value proposition is definitely one of the core things to make sure that you firstly survive the current circumstances, but also over time start to thrive, right? Maybe let's talk to those 2 points. If we're talking, survival, like what are the best strategies for survival? If that is what you need to do now as a business, how do you survive the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months? Johan, would you start us off?
Sure. I think the important bit here is to understand that hope is not a strategy. And I know as entrepreneurs, we're ever so hopeful and optimistic about how things will turn out. But Darwin is famously misquoted in saying that the fittest will survive, but it's actually the most adaptable that will survive, is what he said. And I think during this time, this rings so true. I think companies have to take the time, and you're on lockdown, you have the time, to consider the plans, to what is the core value proposition of a company, and then to say, okay, let's simplify the processes around that. Maybe something just like moving to the cloud will already make a massive difference, in terms of some of your core processes that's running. But I think to think that it will be business as usual is unfortunately going to be the wrong strategy. It won't be business as usual. How the economic landscape will will be completely different from what you've grown used to, and maybe from what they've grown used to developing a business in. So I think considering all these things, considering the negative growth outlook, as Calvin said, never waste a good crisis. They have to spend the time and consider what's the value that they will provide in this time, and then work from there.
I love that. Survival strategies, guys. Anyone else with something that's important to take home from this?
If I can jump in here, maybe also think of work on what you can control. I mean, there's a lot of things going out, a lot of news happening, and you start stressing about all the things that you can't control. The best thing is work on the things that you can control and move from there. I think that's the best thing.
Definitely. No, I like that. And then I think we've spoken about some of the things that are necessary just to make it through the next while. So, sometimes cost cutting has been a big part of that. Guys have also mentioned a lot of different good points. But if we're looking past just making it through, like how do we thrive as businesses? How can entrepreneurs thrive in the new normal and in the future business world that will evolve from this crisis? Lazan, maybe I'll start with you.
I think to go back to basics, which for me is all about human connection and relationships. I've seen over the last few weeks that some of the entrepreneurs that I work with managed to renegotiate, come to new terms, get their suppliers or debtors or clients or stakeholders do things that I didn't think was possible. And it was simply based on the excellent relationships that they had with them. So I think with the new opportunities and with the new avenues that companies are trying, with all of those also come new stakeholders and new relationships. So it's about keeping those existing relationships very strong and really build very strong new, existing relationships and new ones.
Definitely. Has anyone else got a thought on thriving in this environment and beyond?
I think I'll just add to it, and so I think to be able to thrive is and latching onto my previous conversation about adaptabilities. If you can start on that leaner and essentially a more agile structure, it will actually allow you to really be able to pivot up and take hold of the opportunities when it actually arise. So yeah.
Spot on. Yeah. So no, good bit to think about there. Thanks. Okay, so we're then going to move on to our fourth point, which is based around kind of relief funding and tax relief, and what are the things being put out there by government primarily to help entrepreneurs. So we want to take you guys through relief funding as a core opportunity, but that landscape has changed quite a bit in the last while. We've seen the Ruperts come out with a fund that business partners administered, and at the moment, that fund is fully subscribed. I think they said within 3 days they got 10,000 applications and they closed it down. So you can still put your email address in on the website, but and they'll notify you if a second tranche opens up, which we're not sure if that will be the case or not. There's no indication yet that additional tranches will be released there. We've got the Oppenheimer fund, the SAFT fund. I also know that is fully subscribed at over $1 billion. So those loans are all in process and being executed. So that's also a door that's closed. And I think the Department of Small Business has also had together with CFA, has had a quite exciting offering in the form of low interest rate loans. But we've also gotten word that is now fully subscribed, and those are closed off. So it's limiting the options. I think what still remains in the market is definitely the banks. The government, since the president's previous speech, they mentioned 200 billion rand worth of loan guarantees coming into the market, and we've now this week seen some action on that in the form of the first 100 billion being dispersed to the big banks. So maybe Uwais, can you speak to that? Like what is the offering that among the banks? Is it worth it for business owners to think about additional loan finance from the banks? What should we consider?
So just on these loans, it's basically the first tranche has come out this week, and companies, although the government will be guaranteeing the loans, companies need to apply with their own bank, and these loans will be at prime rate. So we're not talking about cheap funding. We're talking about business terms, but there'll be a 6-month payment holiday, which is something. I mean, if you're in a cash flow crunch, that's something that can really that might be the difference between your business surviving or not. So that's something to look into, definitely.
Spot on. Yeah. So I guess loans repayable over 5 years on 60 tranches from your bank. Contact your banker directly. We guess is the best process. There's a massive pool open. We'll still now see as this comes into the market. We'll see how fast it is dispersed and how tricky that process of getting the yes word from the banks will actually be. It'll be the applications so far look relatively smooth and simple, but funding relief isn't always a straightforward process. So those are the big things to think about in terms of the different options at the table right now for relief funding. Maybe let's look at the tax side. If we can start on, or before we look at the tax side, let's go to UIF. Johan, you've worked with TERS a little bit. There's been so many questions on so many business owner WhatsApp groups the last while about how the hell does this work? What happens with foreign employees? The websites kicked me out, and a whole bunch of different things. What has been your experience recently, and what would your recommendations be if someone were to try and navigate applying for the TERS relief funding?
Yeah, no, that's a very accurate description of what has happened. And I think it's because it's something new, right? So TERS is in essence a UIF application on steroids, right? It's a bulk application. So, and it's administered by the Department of Labor, and they haven't done something like this ever. So, so obviously there was expected to be some teething pains. There was a lot of requirements when they started out. you had to have a separate bank account, and you've had to add a lot of different requirements. And as the time progressed, they actually, a lot of those requirements fell away, and they realized it's now becoming mission critical to get funding over to employees that need it the most. And I mean, the idea always behind it was to be able to safeguard the South African employees, and especially the most vulnerable of the South African employees, the ones that had, where businesses are maybe failing, where there was mass retrenchments, where, maybe the people still have a job, but they get paid on a per hour basis, but in a warehouse or wherever, and the warehouse is closed, so they can't work, so they can't get paid in a sense. I have seen on that, though, a lot of businesses also coming to the table and assisting their employees during this time, which I think is very honorable to be able to do, obviously, if affordability allows it for. So I think the latest that I've seen with the application of taxes, that it's a lot smoother process. Obviously, if the UIF declarations and all those things up until now has happened in the way that it should have happened, with the data that in the way that it should have happened, then we get very quick turnaround times. And it's a great value add, to employees and employers alike.
Great. Yeah, so I mean, I think we can probably speak a whole hour about this. We'll maybe structure one of our next webinars around the specific topic, because it is so frequently asked about at the moment. But yeah, definitely something to look at for most employers. I think if you can bear the administrative burden, it's definitely worth the squeeze. If we were to look at the actual tax relief, on income tax, on payroll taxes, Johan, are you able to speak to that as well?
Yeah, sure. So
is it worth it? Like.
Yeah, I think any sort of relief it is always valuable, right? But I think in this case, what people, and entrepreneurs have to consider is this: it's a relief in terms of a loan, and albeit at favorable terms, meaning a 0% interest loans, that you're just extending your liability to a later stage. It's not free money, so it still has to be considered with a bigger cash flow plan. Are you able to pay it back? It's not a free handout, as I said. So, and SARS's interest rates and penalties aren't one of the most lenient as well. So when you do come and you need to start paying it off, are you in a position to be paying it off? Has your business recovered by then? And that's why I said it has to be seen in a greater cash flow plan. But if you are tax compliant and you reasonably foresee a cash positive business within the next few months, then this is one of probably the easiest sourcing of financing to apply for. So yeah, it is a relief with take care.
On the income tax side for companies as well, you have to be making a profit for that to help you, right?
Yeah, that's for sure. If you didn't have to pay tax to start off with, it's not going to help you now.
Yeah, I think that's a funny one in terms of it's relief for clients, for companies in crisis. But those companies who are in crisis right now will probably not be making profits in this period. So yeah, a bit of a catch-22. I'm still making my mind up on if this is really worth it for the average small and mid-size company. But if you are in a profitable position, at least it's something. And it does help. The payroll tax rollover does help for cash flow now. You've mentioned a very important point we haven't touched on. It's just the just strategy around taking on debt, right? Like Johan mentioned, now you must just be so careful, like not to, whether it's delayed taxes or whether it's relief funding or bank finance or whatever be the case, do not heap that up too much, because if the company is taking significant knocks right now, you probably have a smaller business after the crisis that has to dig you out of a big hole that you built when you were at full capacity. I just recently heard an entrepreneur talking about, only in January did they finish the last repayment on the debt that they made in the 2008 crisis. And that blows my mind. I think just for every business owner, it's just a bit of a caution not to take on so much debt on the balance sheet right now, whether it's a good interest rate or no interest. We just don't want to see guys, paying their future profits for years or for a decade into the big hole they've dug in this time. So that's again where that cost cutting thing really comes in, and is quite important. Guys, we'll move on to our last part. Just in terms of leadership, I think this has probably been the most taxing time for business leaders that we've seen to date. Like with so much decision making and so much planning and so much kind of rerouting of plans that needs to happen. How best can a business owner plan and budget and think about this next while? Like, what is the best approach for that? To just clear your mind and figure out what can you do and what can't you do and what must you do first. Zan?
I think it's probably will really depend on each business and the type of industry they are in. Yeah. I will say, in a way, go back to the drawing board and say, and to the basics and say what can we do and what is necessary, both within the from a legal perspective as well, what can be done currently. I think it's about making sure, as some of my colleagues have said already, to stay on top of your budgets and stay on top of your cash flow. And as Uwais mentioned earlier, to focus on the things that you can control, because at the moment there's so much you can't control, whether it's revenue or rules and regulations, etc. So, and for me, one of the things that you can control is currently your cost. So to focus on that. Then you get so much information at the moment, whether that's from the cash flow or whatever else that may be, but to then use that information to turn it into intelligence and then to act really fast, because it seems like everything is moving faster and faster, and in order for your business to really survive and in the end thrive, you'll have to stay ahead of the curve as such. Yeah, so to really use that information and act fast on it, and unfortunately,
I love that. I love that. I think one of the biggest skills for a business owner is to be able to discern, what needs to happen now and what needs to happen next. And I think this crisis has just kind of condensed all of that into, like, now you have to decide faster, more often. The importance and the stakes are even higher than ever before. So it's really kind of like leadership and fast decision making and sticking to your guns is definitely a big play. Uwais, because you deal with this a lot, I'd love to hear, is there anything you'd like to add in terms of just figuring out, putting the next couple of months, 3 or 6 or 12 months into numbers, like the budgeting process and the planning process around cash flow? Like, how practically, how does one go about that? Can you add anything to that?
So I would think you don't do one budget or cash flow and say, I'm done. It's something that you're going to have to keep doing, whether it's weekly or monthly, because situations change, assumptions change, and you have to adapt, as Johan mentioned. Keeping an eye on that cash flow, keeping an eye on maybe you might not have been able to negotiate with your creditor now, but maybe in a month's time you might be able to negotiate a little bit better. So make sure your scenario planning is good and updating that cash flow as often as you can, just to keep an eye on when you're paying your expenses and when money's coming in.
Clever. Yeah, a quarterly board meeting to discuss finances will not quite suffice right now, right?
Not at all.
Yeah, and if I can jump in, I mean, I think having a worst case scenario is always a good thing. To know if you're gonna hit rock bottom, where does the company lie? So yeah, that's what I always like to have, a best versus worst case scenario, just to really give you perspective of what it looks like out there and what the possibilities may be.
It is what I've just learned from entrepreneurs is, maybe after you've discussed and unpacked the worst case scenario, maybe just let them take a day before you discuss anything else or make any decisions.
Yeah.
For lots of companies, the worst case scenario right now is it's an ugly spreadsheet, and it has real life implications that are quite far reaching. So just don't kind of undervalue the emotional baggage that comes with something like that. Like, allow yourself and your teams just the adequate headspace and emotional space to be able to deal with going through those types of processes and thinking it through, and maybe making your decision a day later when you've had time to digest some of the emotions around it. Guys, one more thing I think around leadership is out of the box marketing is something that's really important, generally for scaling up a company, but more so in a time of crisis, to make sure you navigate and survive. I'd love to hear, are there any companies that you guys have worked with that have done some really great things in terms of out of the box marketing? Jan, maybe I'll throw that to you first.
Sure. I think when we talk about marketing, is obviously, especially in today's day and age, you cannot not talk about social media marketing, which forms a really big portion. And I recently read an article where Forbes indicated that there's actually a surge of 61% in social media usage during this COVID time, which is a massive jump. So, just emphasizing the important bit that it plays. But I think it also more so to be able to correctly leverage that and not get lost in the crowd has also increased with the exact same factor of 61%.
Sure.
So, there's a lot more usage, but there's a lot more people also going for those eyes looking at social media. But recently I actually had a client which during this time saw a 10%, a 10 times increase in revenue, which is operating in the e-commerce space. And the thing is, they actually took the time to really understand the value that they contribute, who exactly is their client base, and then implementing a social media strategy exactly around that and pinpointing it to those people. And I think, just heating time into social media is probably not going to cut it. But to really take the time, take a step back and understand who it is that you're exactly trying to reach will probably be your best bet.
I think that's a really nice one to hear in terms of what we've said now in terms of value proposition and pivots. To be able to do 10 times revenue growth in a time like this is absolutely phenomenal. So I think everyone on the video today is like, wow, okay, cool. It's possible. There are companies doing it. We have got clients who are doing, triple digit growth in this time. It's not absolutely impossible. You just have to figure out, how to leverage the time and how to leverage technology and pivots to get that absolutely right. Calvin, do you have a scenario on your side?
I think Johan hit it spot on in terms of making use of the channels that are out there, and it kind of reaches the most users or people that are relevant to your business. And social media being obviously, most people being on social media is a perfect platform to use. But also, again, just making sure that you're not overexposed in terms of those costs. Those costs can also run from a marketing perspective. I've seen costs run, hundreds of thousands a month. So just to also understand what your contract terms and legal terms are with those providers. But on the upside, definitely in terms of exposure, it's probably is the best platform at this time.
Then I think under leadership, we can't finish up the leadership talk without talking about communication. I think communicating with your client and your prospect clients from a marketing perspective and a client services perspective is important, but also communication internally to your teams, I think right now is really critical. Uwais, what would you say are the most important things you've seen entrepreneurs do that help them to communicate clearly to their teams?
I think what's most important is over communication as opposed to under communication. If you think you're communicating enough, rather communicate more than communicating less. Especially if you've implemented salary cuts, employees are afraid for their jobs. If you're not communicating, they're just getting the negative influences from other people that are getting retrenched. So it's best to rather to eliminate that fear is to continue over communicating to ensure that you don't lose, because you could risk losing your best employees who will start looking elsewhere if there's other potential opportunities in the market, and you don't want that to happen.
Definitely. Yeah, we can't overemphasize proper communication with your teams at the moment. Guys, so I think with that, that's the last kind of question around all of our topics that I've had. Maybe I just want to give the floor to each of you for another minute and just hear, like, is there one core thing you would love to leave as a takeaway for business owners watching the session? In this time, a message or a key takeaway from what has been said today, Johan?
Yeah, I think it all looks very gloom and doom out there, but I think part of what we try to accomplish, obviously, today is to also say, yes, there is still hope. There is still opportunity in every, the old saying, say, every dark cloud has a silver lining. The challenge is to be able to, take that step back, look in the sky, look forward, see if you can spot that silver lining, and then leverage that to the best of your abilities. But yes, it is unfortunately a difficult time. We're all in this together, and everyone is affected in some way or another. So to think that it's just you, you don't have to feel isolated by that. There is a lot of resources available. There's a lot of help available as well. It's just a matter of leveraging that and asking for it.
Lizanne, final thought from your side?
I think this too shall pass. We don't know what it will look like when it is passed, but it will. And I think while it does, to stay positive, to stay hopeful, and to take advantage of the situation, the opportunities, whether that's of a new business revenue stream or spending more time with your family.
Great, love it. Calvin?
Yeah, I think, look, Lizanne and Johan have already summed it up pretty well. Uwais and I might struggle here. But in terms of, just there is opportunity out there, just because we're in a crisis and possibly a recession and a pandemic, let's stay away from the negativity. It's important to stay positive. It really is. It doesn't mean that you can't bag your biggest client at the moment. So just from that perspective, be ready, be prepared to take on big work and do your best to put yourself out there. Value employees, put them first, and yeah, cash is king.
Love it. Uwais, you have to have something for us still.
So Calvin stole a little bit out of my mouth here, but I was going to talk about cash being key. But cash flow, for me, cash flow forecast, very important in this time. You need to have a handle on where your cash is going. Another thing that I think to add is to stay compliant, because if you want to get some of that relief funding, you're not going to get any relief funding if you're not compliant with SARS or with any of the other legislation. That's probably my main takeaways. And then just having a sober head. Emotional decisions are not going to help you and might result in losing value in your business. So try and make sober, straightforward decisions.
Solid. Thank you for that, guys. I think we've covered some really good basis. I think we've touched on some very important things for business owners to think about in this time. I hope for everyone that there was a couple of these learnings that they can take for themselves and use that, implement it in their teams, in their companies, share some of the thoughts with some of the founders that they're working with, and maybe also just helps you to know that you're not alone. There's every single entrepreneur, every single management team at the moment out there. They're grappling with similar things. It's really hard, the conditions out here. 2s, 3s, and 4s out of 10s we got in the beginning. But I think there's definitely there is hope, even though it's not a strategy, Johan. And there are definitely opportunities, as the guys have mentioned. Now we've seen clients with triple-digit growth in this time. It can be done. You just have to figure out how it's done for you. So I'm looking at our chat down here. I don't see a ton of questions. Does anyone have a specific question that they'd like to put to the panel, or maybe even to an individual panelist, if you like? Give it a second. Otherwise, Uwais is going to elaborate for the next 5 minutes about his key takeaways still.
Please save us from that.
Okay, so guys, if there is anything, you guys are welcome to reach out to the Outsourced CFO team. We're a team of finance professionals based in Cape Town that are helping a lot of different entrepreneurs navigate these complexities. So if you have questions, if you need someone with a finance and tax background to get involved and just help you solve and navigate and plan, or if you just want to call us to have a rant about how tough things are right now, please do so. You can reach us at outsourcedcfo.co.za. Everything is on the website in terms of reaching out to us. We'll also probably end up. We've got like a COVID-19 business support group for entrepreneurs from some of our webinars that are specifically focused on this time. What we'll do is probably add you guys to it. If you don't want to be part of the group, like by all means, just jump out. We'll be sharing relevant content as it comes out there. You can also post your questions there. And then, yeah, then I think that is a wrap. About SARS, yeah. So someone joined us late. They missed the SARS and tax relief session. I see is here in the Q&A. So it's anonymously posted. So we have tackled that. The video will be up on YouTube and probably up on some of the social channels for Outsourced CFO within a day or so. So you can have a recap if you like. We will probably also end up doing, just because the need is so big and the questions are so many, we'll do a separate session soon around around TERS and tax relief and how all of these different things work and how you can kind of navigate that. So that's a wrap from our side for now. Thank you very much to our brave panelists. Putting us chartered accountants in front of a camera is a daunting task, but you guys have been absolute stars. Thank you for just sharing the knowledge. I know it's been acquired with a lot of hard hours of helping business owners in this time. So yeah, very proud of you guys, and thank you very much for all the shares. We will speak soon. Good luck to everyone out there.